Welcome to Unraveling the Brain. I'm your host, Dr. Josh Mattson. Today we get the great pleasure of talking with Dr. Stinn, who, if you are calling in for a phone consult or anything like that, there's a high likelihood you're going to be talking with him. Stephen is actually one of my oldest friends that I actually went to chiropractic school with. He was my roommate, and also he's the one that I learned a lot of this neurodevelopmental stuff with in the first place. So, I mean, I remember back even years ago, just me and him sitting in a small space in my office learning all this neurodevelopmental stuff together. So if you get a chance to talk to him, it's an awesome pleasure for you. And I'm super excited. We're going to talk about ADHD today. We're going to talk about diet, lifestyle modifications, and the brain. So let's jump into it. What's up, man?
Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Super excited to have you here.
So excited to be on this new role.
Well, let's talk about, so the new role is he is helping with online communications, helping explain stuff inside my social media. Like if people ask questions, he's going to help with answering a lot of that and having a doctor there that can answer a lot of these complex questions that, that has been doing it for a long time, who has experienced, seeing many kids and developing, all these protocols and procedures as well. But, and then if we do phone consults, he'll be doing that as well. But let's dive into the topic of attentional issues, ADHD. And I want to kind of break it down, everything from what's going on in the brain to what's going on metabolically, gut-wise, and all the things that parents can do to help their kids and all the things that they should avoid.
Yeah.
So let's jump in.
Yeah, I think a lot of parents are stuck, or they're just like, I don't even know where to begin. And I'm always, in my head, or when I talk to them, it's like, these are such simple things, but they're not necessarily what I've found are the easiest things to implement.
Right.
And you can, just even as far as diet, of like, as easy as or as simple as it is, it's like eat whole foods, eat meat, eat fruit and vegetables, avoid packaged foods. But then I think parents have a lot of hard times implementing that.
Yeah.
Where it's like, oh man, anything that comes in a package, most of the time, it's not going to be doing them any favors for their brain inflammation or their attentional issues. So just getting them to almost learn how to make some food from home and not have to have all the already packaged and processed things that are so easy and convenient.
Yeah. And, like when we start out talking about, because we can talk about diet all day of like, these kids have decreased protein. They're eating way too many carbohydrates. Their gut is just an absolute mess. Let's start with the system. Let's start talking about, when we run labs or when we see kids that have this going on, what's going on in the gut, number one, and then we'll talk about how that affects the brain. So, what are big things that you've seen over the history of with kids that have attention issues? What's going on with their gut? What food sensitivities? Let's break kind of that down for parents so we can start talking about what to avoid, and then we'll talk about the impacts on the brain with that too.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing is just that their gut is inflamed.
Yeah.
And then anytime your gut is inflamed, your brain's inflamed.
Yep.
They're connected to each other. So eliminating that inflammation, but then you see, you have your microbiome and you want a good variety of good bacteria in your gut so that it's not inflamed. And most of the times, just through diet and through your standard American diet of, if you're not cognizant of it and you're just going to the convenient foods, you're going to alter that microbiome greatly. And you're going to eliminate that healthy diversity of bacteria. And
that bacteria keeps that under control, keeps infections under control, and it keeps yeast under control, which that again can lead into more gut inflammation.
Yeah. And you hear parents that are like, they have trouble in school, they can't focus, they're sick a lot. And it's like, in my head, I'm like, yeah, these are all just the same thing. I mean, that's the same exact underlying issue. It's the gut and the brain are unhealthy. And
Yep. And as that inflammation builds, then they release, so that mechanism is their gut gets inflamed, then they release zonulin to try to, gets released from our gut, our gut barrier, but it can also be our lungs too. But that starts breaking down our blood-brain barrier, starts opening up that blood-brain barrier. Then we can start having molecular mimicry and immune system reactivity against the brain, which is unreal.
Start getting sensitive to all types of foods. And it's just a big cascade that.
Yeah. I was talking to a parent this morning of, we looked at their oats test. All of his neurotransmitters were really low, and he happened to respond well to stimulants for attention, and he was responding well to anxiety medications for anxiety, but it's because all of his neurotransmitters were so low, and those things just help basically promote better or more neurotransmitter dopamine and serotonin function. But like a lot of people don't realize those neurotransmitters are all produced, or like 80% of them are produced in the gut.
Yeah, and
And
your immune system.
yeah, and if your gut's just trashed, you can't produce these neurotransmitters. So, like one of the first things I look at is like on an oats test is looking to see, do they have any like how's their neurotransmitter balance? Because if it's all really low, I know it's a gut issue. And that's typically what you see with ADHD.
Yeah, and then the next hurdle for parents is uh, picky eaters, and then it's like, well, they only like these things, and then it just it's a it's I don't have the magic solution even through this many years of, you just we gotta figure it out together, and how can we get this child the proper nutrients that they need.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe let's give them a couple, like, here's a couple ways that you can have some really quick wins. I have a few ideas of my own, but like, what are things that you have found that, okay, if we can get these foods in, these are ones that typically kids will eat, that we can at least start getting a decent balance of protein to carbohydrates, enough fat for the brain. Like, what are some easy things that you found?
I've told them to, like, people track macros,
Yep.
and I'm essentially like track protein and make sure they're just at least getting this much protein.
Yeah.
Whether, because then it's, they only have to track one thing. They don't have to track all the other things, but it's like, let's at least make sure that their brain's getting this protein and amino acids. So, tracking how much meat they eat. And then if they don't like meat, making sure that they get a quality protein shake or something that gives them the protein that they need. Because I just in my opinion, that's the most important macro for the brain,
For sure. They need to have essential amino acids
and
to,
it's always the lowest intake. Like, every time it's the lowest intake.
it is.
Fat can be low too, but almost no kids are getting, I don't think, enough protein.
For sure, 100%. And like, even when we run oats tests, you can see their protein levels. I mean, they're all super low, and then you run their normal blood test. Their globulins are low, like all these other markers, and there's many different ones they look at, but are all low because they don't have enough protein or building blocks for their brain, their body. And it's like trying to build a house without having any building blocks or foundation to it. And
And if you tell a parent, like, hey, depending on the size of the child, but if I was like, I need them to at least get 60 grams of protein, or whatever that number is for how big the child is, once they start tracking it, they're like, oh my gosh. They're
I only
like,
got 7 today.
yeah, he's like, he had 17. And I'm like, yeah, we need to pump those numbers up. So,
Getting protein, getting that macro. Couple simple things that I've found really nice and easy is like a bone broth protein, like a chocolate protein. My own son will drink chocolate milk in the morning and get like 30 grams of protein from that, and he loves it. He drinks coffee with me and my wife, and gets protein like it's super easy. I found that a lot of kids will eat bacon, or they'll eat something along those lines. Like, once you know the macro or the amount that you're trying to hit, I think it's a really good point of just focusing on that, because to go along with that is, as they start eating more protein, then they start producing more stomach acid to break that down, which that also helps to start killing off a lot of that yeast overgrowth and bad bacterial overgrowth, and starts to help balance that gut out again.
yeah.
Okay, let's talk about what are just a few easy ways just to get enough protein in a kid.
The quality protein mix, like you were talking about, I think is probably the easiest way. Obviously, you want like whole foods of meat, but
Right.
if that's not the case, or I found a lot of copycat recipes of just like chicken nuggets and things where you can put in a food processor chicken, and I think there was like Parmesan cheese or something in it, and a couple different things that kids typically won't react to or have any issues with. And then they can make it at home like that, and then they think they're eating McDonald's
Yeah,
instead of
eating chicken
eating
nuggets.
like a plain chicken breast or something like that. Like, it doesn't have to be super boring.
Yeah, I feel like I've noticed, and you can probably give some insight on this too, but like I feel like I've noticed, as you like, a lot of these kids are really picky. As you get more protein into them, I feel like their palate expands a lot, like their foods open up a lot. And I just honestly think it's just because their gut's healthier and it can actually break down and digest more complex things.
I see that all the time as well.
One of the big mechanisms here is, and I know we've talked about this for years, but just different food sensitivities, different cross reactivity with the brain. So I think that's an important point to hit of like, if a parent's like, hey, oh yeah, I can't get gluten or I can't change their diet, I can't get rid of dairy if they're sensitive to it. And like really helping them to understand like why that's so important, not just like, oh, we're just taking this food out just for fun. Like there's a real reason.
Yeah, or like, "Well, I had gluten as a kid, so it's totally the same now."
Yeah,
And it's
it's
like,
exactly the same.
it's not at all. It affects their cerebellum, it affects their coordination, it affects the whole coordination of their brain. It triggers a ton of behavioral issues is
Oh,
what I
for
found.
sure.
Their mood and their mood stability changes so much when you can get them off of the common, like, gluten, or whether that be gluten or dairy, if you don't have a specific lab to tell you, those are probably the 2 most common ones, but
Yeah.
for sure gluten. It just serves no nutritional need at all, and it just creates a lot of inflammation.
Yeah, and what happens there is that there's something called molecular mimicry where basically when we eat those foods and we have a leaky gut, our immune system goes, "Hey, like this shouldn't be here." But the problem is those proteins in gluten and gliadin are so similar to structures in our brain. One would be our cerebellum that helps us coordinate. Another one would be another aspect of that called the Purkinje cells, and they dampen sensory information coming in. So like if a kid's really sensory overloaded, they can't regulate their sensory systems. A lot of times it's just because they're eating too much gliadin, um, or that's a compounding factor. And then casein, that can cross react with our dopamine receptors. So like that can play into like tics, repetitive activities, OCD, anxiety.
Yeah, and the
And
leakier their gut is, the more, sensitive they're gonna be to it.
yeah,
If one child's eating gluten and it doesn't seem to really affect them, and then your other child eats it and, I've heard parents say, like, he turns into a monster,
yeah,
uh, that's probably why, is that their gut is leakier.
yeah,
It's leaking into the bloodstream, your immune system's trying to take care of it, and that whole cascade happens.
yeah. What's your favorite things to help with leaky gut besides diet? Getting their diet regulated, getting enough fiber, getting enough protein, getting rid of non-complex carbohydrates as much as possible.
I like L-glutamine.
Yep.
That's a big one for me. I would recommend that to nearly every child that I want to start addressing the gut. But like, I don't think you can necessarily supplement a poor diet. So I do think
No.
diet is the best thing, because you're not really going to overcome that just by giving them supplements. But I would say L-glutamine would be my number one that I use to help. But what about
Yeah.
you?
Dr. Ashley does all that now, to be honest. So I used to use a lot of L-glutamine. Used to use a lot of prebiotics, probiotics. If there's any infections, obviously got to take care of those at the same time. So any herbal things that help with that, or homeopathy to help with those infections. But yeah, glutamine's huge for that. Um, and fish oils, turmeric, resveratrol, just to bring inflammation down, and give the body a chance to heal, would be kind of my top priorities. But you don't change your diet, you can't supplement out of a bad diet.
Yeah,
So,
resveratrol's solid,
yeah, yeah, it's a
and
good one.
curcumin, and yeah, all those anti-inflammatory ones.
Um, okay, so fix the gut, which also helps heal the blood-brain barrier, which you have to heal first because or else anytime you eat a food, anytime you eat whatever, you get exposed to a environmental toxin, you're gonna trigger an inflammatory response in the brain. So, but let's talk about obviously we know there is a ton of aspects of the brain that play into this. So let's start from the bottom up and we'll just start working through here's the areas of the brain, here's the different reflexes, here's the different aspects that plays into and then we'll go from there on like a rehab strategy for them.
Yeah, and if you're a parent that you're like, we've tried everything, or been doing therapy for years, or we've been doing this and that, or occupational therapy, and it's just like very minimal movement of the needle. That's why you have to take care of the metabolic stuff first, or at least start addressing it, because once you do that and then you start doing these therapies, the brain can actually take that stimulation and do something with it. So that's why I think the diet is very important for long term success. But yeah, I mean, for the brain, once you start working with that, everything stems off of primitive reflexes. So
Yep.
those are the reflexes that you're born with. I always call them your brain's training wheels for the first, 6 to 12 months of life for the most part. It's just giving your brain input that it needs to be able to survive those. But then you should, just like when you're learning to ride a bike, you should get rid of those training wheels or primitive reflexes so that the brain can start doing more complex things. So always starting with those primitive reflexes.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like, say, "Oh, I've been doing therapy forever," and number one, no one's ever even checked their primitive reflexes in 99% of the time, and no one's ever made sure that they even have enough energy for their brain to develop. So, super good points there. Um, Most common reflexes that I see would be ATNR, STNR, TLR for sure, and probably a moral reflex. Um, any other big ones?
I mean, just the ATNR specifically,
Yeah.
I mean, it is like almost 100% of the
Oh,
time.
yeah,
And
for
even if
sure.
your child is like quote unquote asymptomatic, or they are doing well in school, or they, have great motor skills, even if you did check them, I bet you'd be surprised in how many kids still have that one alone. That's
Yeah,
by far the most common one that I see.
I agree. I mean, nearly every kid that has, especially has attentional issues, and a big portion of that is just because their brain is so inflamed it cannot function well enough to inhibit the reflexes and shut them down. That comes again. It comes back to these environmental factors that, in diet related aspects, that you have to take care of.
And to get rid of that ATNR, a lot of it is your kid needs full range of motion, being able to turn their head. And I think a lot of the times we're just in these like, I'm trying to think of the word, not cages, but like containers, like a carrier where you're just kind of like this and there's just not a lot of movement with the head.
Yeah,
I think that is a huge thing.
yeah. Early in life, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I agree. They have to. I mean, caudal. Was that the cephalcaudal? Cephal's head. Yeah, cephalcaudal law, where basically they develop from the head down. So if they can't move their head through full ranges of motion, they can't develop the next stage, which would be their core moving, then their shoulders, then their hips. They can't develop that whole motor progression appropriately.
I
Uh
think that's one of the big reasons that kids should be checked by a chiropractor early on,
huh.
is because just going through the birthing canal or however they were born, whether it's natural or C-section, a lot of the times just through that delivery, you misalign those, especially top two bones in the neck,
Yep.
and that throws off all the biomechanics of them being able to move. And then I think that cascades to not being able to move your head properly or through their full ranges of motion. You retain those primitive reflexes, and then it just sets them up to not be able to go through proper neurodevelopment.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you how many kids, like, I mean, an infant when they're born, their head should be able to go, I mean, technically past their shoulder, but easily to their shoulder with no restriction. Can't tell you how many kids you literally can't turn their head past like 10 degrees, 20 degrees. It's kind of crazy, like how tight a lot of those kids are, yeah, or infants are, I should say, um, especially even at birth.
Do you
So,
think that's like a neuroplastic thing? Like they just get comfortable not moving it through there, so they literally don't know how to engage those muscles
yeah,
back and forth?
yeah, they've just never had the chance to even develop it because maybe it hurts to move past a certain range of motion. I mean, and like if you think about it, even just a normal vaginal birth is 25 pounds of axial traction with rotation, and which is wild. If you think about that, that's like, I mean, that's literally gruesome way to put that is like holding an infant by their head and literally hanging 25 pounds. Like, your neck is not meant as an infant's neck is not stable enough for that, right? And then a C-section is upward of 60 pounds. Like that's a lot of stretching and rotation and torsion on that upper cervical that has no stability.
And that's a normal birth. I mean,
Yeah.
that's not like oh, we had like a really traumatic birth. Like that's just a normal
Yeah.
everyday thing.
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Even my own son, he was my first one was born in a hospital. It was supposed to be a home birth, but then we had some water break early and whatnot. But like his birth was like it was rough, and he couldn't turn his head at all to the right. He couldn't tilt his head at all to the right. And it took me like 3 weeks of working on him daily to get that normal, and because he had an injury. And the, eh, it's just it's wild how and if I wouldn't have known to check those things, I wouldn't have checked it, and
How
therefore
lucky is he to have that
yeah,
as a
like, we
dad?
would've had, like, all these motor issues and developmental issues if I wouldn't have known to look for those things. And, there's just so many new parents that are afraid to even turn their child's head, let alone, like, they're afraid to hold them almost.
Well, and I think that's important to mention to parents of like, oh, I don't want my kid adjusted by a chiropractor. It's not like a twist and crack and pop and their heads going
Yeah.
all the way across the room. It is such a gentle process to restore that biomechanics.
Yeah, because I mean, they don't have muscle tone built up. Like it doesn't require. I mean, it barely requires anything. Like the pressure you can handle on your eyeball is literally like the amount of pressure it takes to move the upper cervical
I
spine.
always tell them to, if you were like checking to see how ripe a tomato is by pushing on it, that's
Yeah,
about the pressure that you're using.
yeah, it takes almost nothing.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got primitive reflexes. Number one has to develop, helps us to start to develop our motor cortex. Out of our motor cortex, all of these other systems develop, like our speech motor systems, and and really out of it is the foundation of everything. Motor development is. Um, let's talk about the frontal lobes because obviously that's the cerebellum and the frontal lobes are probably the two biggest areas of dysfunction in kids with attentional network
Yeah.
challenges.
And I always picture the cerebellum being the next up to develop after primitive
For
reflexes.
sure.
And I always think the biggest thing that you can do for a child that's, or, a baby is tummy time and strengthening those core muscles so that it can feed up to the cerebellum
Yep.
and start making it stronger. So just making sure that they get enough tummy time. And a lot of times they'll be fussy and it's like they don't want to be in that position, but it is helping them so much to develop their brain to have enough time like that.
Yeah, and how many of those kids, like, when you look at you look at the research, then you see all these patients clinically, like, most of these kids with attention issues, they have really low muscle tone, they have really weak cores, they have really poor just coordination, which again, those are all cerebellum. I mean, every single one of those things I just said comes directly from our cerebellum. So,
Yeah. And when they are a baby, they don't have to be in a crib or a carrier all the time. Like you can have them just out on the floor
oh
so that
yeah.
they are free to move and start learning how to engage those muscles and start developing the cerebellum that way too. So I'm always a big fan of, blanket on the floor, let them lay there. They don't have to be in this cooped up position so that they
Yeah.
can start moving and developing the brain.
Yep. Yeah, for sure, 100%. I think I learned this a long time ago. It was really interesting, and now we're seeing it over and over again. But the midline structures of the body, like your joints of your spine, these small intrinsic muscles, they're kind of like generators that basically they fire up our midline cerebellum, but then that fires into our frontal lobes, our orbital frontal system, dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, and those are the areas of the brain that are dysfunctional in kids that have attention issues. Like if those areas aren't functioning, we just literally can't pay attention. We can't create impulse control. We can't do all those things. And that's what it's really interesting. Almost every kid that comes in with attentional issues or ADHD, the first area that we almost always have to work on is midline cerebellum and start rehabbing that area. And they usually do better just by doing that without ever even doing anything for the frontal lobes.
Yeah, and like you were saying with the generators, I always say core strength is you can picture your core strength as like batteries for your brain,
Yeah.
essentially. And even though it may seem like, oh, my kid's really strong, or he can do, pull ups, or he can do this or that, and then I'll have them sit in a bridge position, and it's like
Yeah,
for
like
two
like lay on
seconds.
their back and
Yeah,
bend their knees and lift their bottom
so it's
off the
like they may
table.
be really good at soccer or they may be, good at sports, but then you do check their core and it is weak.
Yeah.
And so that's always a place where I'm like, let's get this stronger. That's going to give their brain the proprioception that it needs.
Like having a kid do a Superman, they can literally not they can't even raise all four of their extremities off at the same time, and if they can, it's like 2 seconds and boom. Yeah, if every parent at home, if your kid has attention issues, check those 2 things plus have them go on their side and do like a side plank. Guarantee it's gonna be super weak every time.
Yeah. And if you just get that stronger, that's going to feed into the cerebellum and all those attentional networks. And that alone,
It's
past
a
the
game
diet,
changer.
that's going to help them a lot.
Yeah, and a lot of times their core doesn't activate appropriately just simply because they still have primitive reflexes that are in the way. And like an 18R, they can't connect the right and left side of their body appropriately. They can't coordinate those muscles appropriately because they have a reflex in the way of doing that.
Yeah. And then as you develop the midline, the core, then they start to develop the outside.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I see a lot of the times are kids with fine motor issues and they've been doing fine motor skills forever and they're not going and like they're not seeing much progress. And then you start doing core strengthening exercises with them first to get that strong so that the midline can be strong. And then all of a sudden the lateral cerebellum exercises where you're working on fine motor come on
Start
and
to
then
integrate.
they start to see a lot of progress with that.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense because when you think of like an infant starting to develop, the first thing they'll do is as an infant, they'll lay on their belly, they start lifting their head, they start rolling and activating their midline structure of their body. Then they start army crawling and using their shoulders and their hips. Then they get up on their hands and knees and use their shoulders and hips more against gravity. That's their intermediate cerebellum or like the kind of the middle there on each side. Then as they sit up, they start grabbing stuff, putting in their mouth. That's their lateral cerebellum, their fine motor, and that lateral cerebellum also coordinates their speech centers. Then they eventually get up and walk, and again, that's lateral cerebellum as well. So it's like you can literally see that whole cerebellum developing from midline to intermediate to lateral just through that normal developmental sequence. And how many of these kids never army crawled, never crawled appropriately, and like they never developed that whole sequence appropriately.
And you said one thing that when I first learned about it or kind of made sense of it was how the speech builds off of your motor skills. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh, that makes sense. Because once you start thinking of speech as a motor skill, it's like, this child's having speech issues. And then you start working on their motor system to help them with their speech.
Yeah.
It seems so not connected. And
Yeah.
then you're like, wow, that is totally
I
connected.
can't tell you how many kids start speaking and we never ever once do a speech activity. We just work on getting that motor system to come online and start to activate and getting the cerebellum healthier. And it's nuts how much change in speech we get, even though we do nothing with speech.
Yeah, so that's besides diet. I think I've changed my answer to core strengthening. That's probably your best uh your best bet with improving intentional networks if your child's struggling with ADHD
Yeah.
because almost every single child with ADHD, you put them through core strengthening exercises, they're not going to like it. They hate it,
Yeah.
but it's going to be so therapeutic for them.
Yeah, for sure. And then, obviously the main thing that most people focus on is, oh, the frontal lobes. We want to get enough dopamine for the frontal lobes. We want to give them this medication to increase dopamine in the frontal lobes. And for me,
You want to get to why is that happening in the first place?
exactly, like that's an area that yes is weak and yes is a problem, but it's definitely not the first place to start.
Yeah, because there's a reason that the frontal lobe's not able to do the things that it's supposed to do. And those are the kind of the underlying things that
Yeah.
we're talking about between primitive reflexes and
They don't
the
have enough
cerebellum.
activity to it for it to develop in the first place. And it's crazy how many times I see a kid that we work through primitive reflexes, we work through their balance centers, we get their eyes functioning more appropriately, and their attention doesn't change at that point. But 6 months later, they no longer have any attentional issues. And it's because now we've created a good enough foundation that now their frontal lobe is starting to get enough input on a constant, everyday basis for it to actually start to mature.
Yeah, I think if you can show parents that developmental pyramid of, at the top is the frontal lobe, that's what we want to function well. But look at all these steps we have to take to
Yeah.
do that. And then I think once parents see that, they're like, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and they've been trying to do neurofeedback for their frontal lobes for the last year and nothing's changed. And maybe sometimes it does change because it's that we get some frontal regulation and some frontal inhibition. But when they do those things and it doesn't change, it's almost always because that foundation just is not there yet. Or they're just metabolically not able to handle that. They don't have enough energy to even integrate those activities they're doing because they have super dysregulated or poor diets.
And beyond, I mean, I'm kind of going to get into the vestibular system here, but beyond core strengthening exercises, have them do balancing skills or an obstacle course, or, let's see how long you can balance on one leg or with your feet together, and then try to improve that. That's going to give you the same effect.
Yeah, and that's because those vestibular system, they feed right into that midline cerebellum. That's like one of the biggest inputs for that midline cerebellum and comes right into your floccular nodulus and right through your midline cerebellum and into your brainstem. And I mean, which is the main areas that we know to be weak or dysfunctional. A lot of kids that have attention issues.
Yeah, get them stronger and then get them moving.
Yeah, weird. Feed them healthy, you get them strong, and then you make them go do a bunch of complex activities like sports. It's crazy how their brain changes.
A lot of the times, if I don't want to like exercise or something, I just picture, okay, if I go move, that's basically charging my brain up, and then I'll just feel better. So I'm gonna
Yeah.
go do that.
Oh yeah, and you work out every day, run every day, you do something complex or activate your muscles or lift every day. It's unreal how much better you feel and how much better your brain functions on a daily basis. And I mean, just don't, do that for a week straight, and you can you can see and feel the difference in how your brain functions. Same thing for a kid. And they're supposed to be moving like 6 hours a day. And most kids sit in school all day, then they go home and they play video games all night. And that's a whole nother conversation of how that dysregulates the brain. But
Yeah, I mean, you think about it, and then they wake up, they go to school, they sit, and then a lot of times both parents work, and they come home and then sit. So it is, unless they're getting extracurricular activities, it can be challenging to like, hey, you need to move because it's
yeah.
literally going to help you be able to pay attention.
Yeah, when you sit for long periods of time, you're actively degenerating your midline cerebellum. And then the last big system that I want to focus on is so many of these kids. I mean, I can't tell you how many right eye reports I've ran to look computerized assessments to see how their eyes are functioning, but they almost always have extremely saccadic eye movements. They can't track their eyes appropriately. Their eyes are skipping and jumping everywhere, and they can't fixate their eyes appropriately. If you can't fixate your eyes, you can't pay attention. It's pretty simple. Your fixation systems, your ability to your frontal eye field sit in front of your attentional network. So if you can't fixate, you can't focus.
Yeah, and just to recap, it's like primitive reflexes first, then cerebellum, where we were talking about core strengthening and balance, and then this is where you move into the vestibular system and eyes. And usually, when you see a new patient and they have really bad eye tracking, it's because they still have primitive reflexes and their cerebellum's weak. So that stuff naturally will improve when you start to fill in the blanks down below.
Yep.
But a lot of the times they still do need, additional eye tracking. But with vision therapy or things like that, I always recommend to parents, I love vision therapy, but let's make sure that the underlying systems are developed so that you can get the most out of your vision therapy.
Yeah. Yeah. And we refer for vision therapy all the time. And the but if those reflexes aren't there, if their balance centers aren't integrated, like, if a kid can't balance, their body's constantly moving, their eyes are constantly trying to adapt to that. And then they're trying to do therapy for their eyes, but their eyes are just really trying to adapt to a high extent. You just get their balance centers developed, you get rid of those reflexes. Now their body's stable. Now you can just focus on the eyes.
Do you remember like your first few patients where you would have them track back and forth and their eyes would be really jagged? And they're like, yeah, my child can't read. And then we got rid of like the ATNR and then like we check again and they're smoother. And you're like, this is so
Yeah,
cool.
that's so crazy. But now it
I
happens
always
every
think of
time.
that.
It's like, I know the first time you saw something like that, it's like, oh my gosh, that's insane how much that changed. The first time you took gluten out of a kid's diet, and all of a sudden, like 4 days later, they could track your finger, and you're like, well, that's kind of wild. And but now it's just like, I mean, it just comes down to basic understanding of science and the brain, and it makes so much sense. And when you see it over and over and over and over again, it's like these are the things that you're going to see in nearly every kid that has attention issues.
If you find a kid that struggles to track up and down, what do you typically see that child struggles with just like symptom wise? Is there
Um,
anything?
so they'll usually have so a lot of stuff related back to the STNR, symmetrical tonic neck reflex. So you'll see they'll be messy eaters. They'll have a harder time coordinating their upper and lower body together. They'll have troubles copying stuff from a board. They'll have fine, handwriting issues. A lot of times they'll have double vision. Maybe the big ones. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, those. But I was also just going to say if your child does like sports, this is one way you can get them to stick with their exercises of primitive reflexes and cerebellar exercises. Is you tell them that they're going to be able to hit the ball better with
Oh
in
yeah.
baseball, and they're going to be able to have better hand-eye coordination and be better at soccer. And that
Yeah.
usually gets kids on board a lot.
If a kid is resistant to do something, every single thing that we just talked about, every primitive reflex, every balance issue, eye tracking issue, if they work on that, it is for sure going to make their sports related activities better, because you have to have these systems developed for really complex motor skills.
Yeah, because the parents want it because they want them to be able to read and pay attention and get better grades in school, but
That kid
that
doesn't
doesn't
care
fire.
about that at
Yeah, he's
all.
like, I just want to score more touchdowns. And you're
Yeah.
like, well, this is how you do it, man.
Yeah, exactly. I was the same way. I want to play sports. I didn't care I couldn't read, but it's an easy way to get two birds, one stone. Is that what it's called?
That's right.
Yep. Anything else? Any other big top? We should talk about before we end. We do need to talk about electronics and games and XYZ and dopamine and attention, because that's a huge, very important topic, I think, and that'd be the last thing.
Yeah, so with screens or video games, I mean, one of the worst things is just because they're sitting there and they're
Yeah.
not moving, and we just talked about how much building core strength and moving is for the brain, but secondly, it just fatigues the brain out,
Yep.
with that much stimulus. Your brain gets fatigued, and then you start to have meltdowns, and you can't focus, and you can't concentrate, so I would say, the 2 biggest things that I've seen is, 1, it fatigues the brain, and 2, they're not moving, so
Yeah. Yep. And then on top of that is like when they're playing a lot of those games, or maybe they're swiping through YouTube, they're getting hits of dopamine that are just unnatural. And like for most of those things, the way those games are set up is like they focus for a very short period of time, then they get a reward, which is a hit of dopamine. Focus for a very short period of time, get a hit of dopamine. And so they basically are training their brain focus for a extremely short period of time, and then it's rewarded. Well, in everyday life, there is no scenario where it's like, oh, you paid attention for 2 seconds. Here's a cookie. Here's a cookie. Here's a cookie. Like, that's not how the world works. You pay attention for a long period of time that's unrewarded. And if you trained your brain for hours on end to not do that, you can't expect the kid to have attention.
Yeah, well, just for the parents, think because like I've done it before, where like you scroll all day and
Yeah.
you feel so unmotivated, and
Yeah.
you're like, I don't
Yeah.
really want to do
I'm just going to
anything.
go to bed or watch a movie now.
Yeah,
I
it's
know.
like think about the effects it's going to have on that child's brain that's not nearly as developed as yours, and how much it affects you.
Yeah.
Whether you notice it or not, maybe now you'll pay attention to that,
Yeah.
and just kind of notice in your own self if you're scrolling all day or
Yeah. On my third hour of scrolling, my brain's ruined.
we've all been there.
Yeah, I know. I get it. I get it. But yes, especially in kids, especially young kids, like under 6, they should not be on electronic at all. Like their brain is just not. It's going to completely alter the function and the connectivity in their brain.
Because before 6, the left brain hasn't really caught up to the right brain yet. Like, they're not both fully developed equally or as
Correct.
equally as they should be. So that's why before 6 is kind of a magic number when it
Yeah.
comes to electronics. Not that they should be on it a lot after that
Yeah.
either,
Like an hour
but
max.
yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, right now you see babies of all kinds
Oh gosh,
with
it's
tons of
crazy.
screen time.
2-year-old sitting there watching something while they're eating or something along those lines. It's crazy, and it's going to completely alter their brain for the rest of their life.
Yep.
Cool.
So it's eating whole foods, doing primitive reflex
Yep.
work, core strengthening,
Get their balance
moving the
centers.
body. Those
Yep.
are the big things.
Balance, eyes, and then making sure they don't ruin it all by sitting on electronic all the time. Cool.
Don't ruin your work.
Yeah, don't ruin your own work. That's a good way to put that. Well, thanks for your time, man. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to start in here.
Awesome.
I had one question that I wanted to pose. We can either use this,
Yeah.
intersplice it in at some point or not. But a nutrition question I had is if a parent is wanting to go the gluten-free route, but their two biggest hangups are, well, I don't want to lose out on the flavor of my gluten-filled stuff, and I also don't want to spend, the groceries are expensive enough as it is. What are some alternatives that are within the gluten-free friendly route that won't break the bank, but also still retain as close to the original taste, if not improve upon?
Honestly,
You ever tried some gluten-free Oreos, man? I'm just joking.
in my opinion, when I eat healthy and I am really focusing on not eating any junk food, even though the items, like say the meat is more expensive, I feel like my grocery bill's less because I'm not getting any chips or snacks or anything like that. So it's been my experience that the grocery bill's less
Yeah.
when I'm getting meat, fruit, and vegetables
Oh,
because
for
you're just
sure.
basically hitting the produce aisle, the meat aisle, and you're out of there.
Yeah.
Uh, but then I would say, with the flavor thing, you just have to use good seasonings. But other than that, you just kind of have to tough it out, in my
Yeah.
experience.
But I would go on the devil's advocate side of there of like, once you do eat really healthy for a long time, you feel like crap when you eat that. And then you go, man, I don't want that at all. Like that is not appealing to me. Like, I if you, for example, like if I have some candy or something like that, which I rarely ever have every single time the next day I'm like, why did I do that? I'm like hungover. I feel awful. And so like once you stop doing it, it's like the reward is no longer worth it, to be honest. But no, I agree with that of like it's not expensive to eat healthy. Like people say that, but it's like you can get oh man, I went to the grocery store the other day because we needed a meal. I got a rotisserie chicken, I got a salad, I got some rice. It was like $12 and it fed us for like 3 meals. Like how much cheaper can it get than that? Or like you get a dozen eggs and you hard boil them. Like that's like 3 meals in itself, and that was like $2. Or you know, so there's a lot of options that are healthy, but also they're just really not expensive at all.
I have an Aldi by me, and I love Aldi, and their produce is so like, you can get a box of blueberries like this for, like, $2.
Yeah,
Their produce is crazy cheap, so also just shopping to a grocery store that's kind of a no-frills place, can help a lot just with getting cheaper produce and meat and stuff like that.
yeah, yeah, for sure. There's definitely options. If you look, it's pretty easy to find it. And you know, a lot of people make that as an excuse of why they don't want to change their behaviors, but a lot of times it just takes being mind over matter and being consistent.
When you eat less when you're eating healthy too,
Yeah, you're getting way
your
more
body gets the
quality
nutrients, and
proteins
then it
and
goes, "Okay, I'm full." Like, I don't
yeah,
if I'm eating healthy, I, like, almost can't eat 3 meals a day. Like, it's just like, "Oh, I'm not even hungry. I can't eat again." So, I don't know. It's been my own personal experience that it's cheaper eating healthy because 'cause you're just not getting as much food.
yeah, yeah, for sure. I agree with that.
Do you guys have a preferred gluten-free bread alternative? Because that's been my biggest hang up is finding a good gluten-free bread that doesn't seem just dry.
I so, I personally love sourdough, and it has gluten in it, but it's significantly less of a gluten impact. So you're not gluten free, but it's definitely gluten reduced, especially if you get it at like a farmer's market of someone that made it homemade.
Mhm.
Sourdough is
As long
awesome.
as it raises over like 3 or 4 days. Um, I don't really I mean, I will eat that's about the only thing I will eat, but it's like some sourdoughs, if you get cheap ones, I don't do well with because I have just an intolerance, but, like, if you get a really good one, like, I've had good like, Whole Foods has, I've done fine with that one. Sometimes the one from Hy-Vee I do okay with. If I get it from a bakery, like, I'll do fine with that one usually. So, sometimes you just have to test that out and
There was
see.
a keto bakery in Omaha they made a really good bread, I thought. And it had no gluten in it, but now I can't even think of what the ingredients were that were in it. But I do agree that the bread options can
Yeah.
be a little less tasty on the gluten free side.
Yeah, I bet I eat bread once every 2 weeks tops though. So it's like once you stop eating that way, you eat a lot less bread and carbs and a lot more protein, a lot more fat anyways. So what other brain busters you got over there?
Those are my main ones. Just from personal experience, I know sometimes to get on the healthier eating kick, like I want to do the gluten free, but I like my sandwiches, and that's just such an easy thing to make for a lunch that I get hung up on. Oh, but this bread is uh, this is essentially cardboard.
Yeah, you could switch to like a corn tortilla shell or something like that too.
Corn, not flour.
Yeah.
Of course, it has to be.
My, girlfriend has horrible gut issues. She has no issues with sourdough.
Yeah.
So, just from kind of that personal experience as well, I've seen her do completely fine with that as long as, like you said, it's, like, either homemade or from a bakery that you know that they did it the right way. Because I have bought, like, store-bought and mass-produced sourdough,
Yeah,
and
it
it
never
it
goes
goes
well.
back to the same issue that she was having before, but
Yeah.
it definitely does help.
Yeah, for sure. That's a easy change in sourdough is awesome.
Thanks for letting me
Alright.
participate.
You're welcome.
Always, Kyle.
I kinda wanna do a podcast where you're just firing questions.
I
Oh,
think
I
we
love
should
that.
do that. Those are the best ones.
Yeah,
I
I'd
think
be
you
down.
2 would have a really fun conversation.
I would love to just also sit on the couch and just be like your little Andy Richter and just throw in things every now and then.
I would love that.
Like earlier when you said L-glutamine, I wanted to be like, oh, that was my nickname when I was a luchador wrestler. Do I think it would contribute to the learning? Probably not, but a
I think
little
that would bring a
entertainment.
really good piece though to the equation.
Yeah. We'll play around with that sometime.
I like that idea. I think we're on to something
Yeah.
there.